Hi, my name is Alexandra. This is my multimedia component for the safety plan, for the presentation portion of the safety plan. So, for the purpose of the safety plan and subsequent intervention assignment, my partner and I created a scenario about a family with two parents and two children. They are the Moore family. So the Moore family consists of Jessica, who's 34 years old, and she's a stay-at-home mom. Jonathan is her husband, who is also the abuser in this particular situation. Jonathan is 36 years old, and he works in the oil field, so he is the sole breadwinner for the family. The couple has two children, Jacob and Alex. Alex is about 14 years old and he's a pretty social kid. He is really active and participating in baseball, which is his passion, and the parents are pretty supportive. I would say that they could be classified as lower middle class, while Jonathan does make good money working in the oil fields with a four-person family. They do still have some struggles with finances, and obviously baseball's really expensive, and that's one component of that. And Alex is the other son. He is 9 years old, and he is on the autism spectrum disorder, and he's fairly low functioning. Jonathan and Jessica got married a couple years after they graduated from high school. They had Alex when they were very young, and a couple years after they had Alex was when the abuse started occurring. I think that there was a combination of, just the stress of family life and doing it on their own, and dealing with the finances. And at that point in time, Jonathan did not have a good job, was not working in the oil fields. He was doing, just some other, like, moderately paying blue collar work, like construction. And yeah, it was about a couple years after Alex was born that Jessica started experiencing physical abuse at the hands of Jonathan, although the psychological abuse and the coercive behaviors that Jonathan exhibited were happening long before that. So in our presentation, we go over, as well as just those that basic information about the family. We also review the reason why they came for services in the first place. So while Jessica has realized that Jonathan's behavior is extremely abusive, she's never really had the courage to come out and do something about it or get help or intervention from that, either, family or friends, maybe from social support, or even from community mental health resources or the police. I think that she felt shame and embarrassment that she let it go on for so long, and that her family still doesn't know about it. So, Jonathan had always been jealous when they first met. He would get really angry even if her older brother had boys over to the house and she was around. Just really simple things that from the beginning he always wanted to control her behavior, which I think at the time, with her being so young and not really being educated on what was a healthy relationship, that over time, and especially after they had their first son Alex, that these things, kind of became normal as part of the family life. So the incident that led to Jessica finally seeking help was Jonathan and her got in a conflict that broke out in violence, and the neighbors actually overheard this conflict and were rather concerned, so they called the police to do a wellness check. And when the police came to do this wellness check, the door was answered by Jonathan, and they asked if they could talk with Jonathan and Jessica. And Jessica actually had a minor cut and a bruise on her face, which was from Jonathan hitting her in the face. So, the police asked her if she was wanting to press charges. She did not want to press charges on Jonathan. However, she did accept a referral from the police to a community social worker at the local domestic violence treatment center. So, the first part of the social worker's intervention with Jessica and Jonathan was the initial assessment and engagement phase. So, obviously, the first part of the plan change process that we know from the discipline of social work is the engagement phase and then the subsequent assessment phase. During the engagement phase with Jessica and Jonathan, the social worker basically works on building rapport with the family and approaching the issue of the family violence in the home with a non-judgmental attitude. Using skills like active listening, reflective listening, and using a warm tone and empathetic responses. So, um, the social worker meets with the couple, Jessica and Jonathan, together to discuss the issues of the abuse in the home, in addition to discussing these issues with them separately. And that's just to create a safe space for both of them to talk without any filters or without censoring themselves about the abuse that's occurred. And, Jessica can really break down that situation. In addition to that, the assessment phase will also go over some things such as their biopsychosocial history. So in this phase, the social worker can just learn a little bit about, their history or other factors of their social environment. Maybe that includes their history of psychological functioning, like whether or not they've received any mental health services in the past, or whether or not they struggle with mental illness like depression, anxiety, or post-traumatic stress disorder. And it may also go over some other components of their environment, such as whether or not they have any social support. And during this phase, Jessica does discuss that while she does have the social support of her parents and they've always been willing to be there if they needed to be, Jessica really hasn't had a whole lot of interaction with them over the years since marrying Jonathan, because he's always been very controlling over how much time she spends with them, which is little to none, mostly just on major holidays when it's expected to keep up that shiny image of the family. But Jessica's parents have always really wanted to spend more time with the kids, and I think they've always kind of suspected that Jonathan was, pretty controlling, but they definitely are not aware that actual physical abuse is going on in the home. But the assessment will, in addition to assessing for social support, may also talk about some of the systems that are in their environment, such as whether or not they're affiliated with any other environments outside of, the family life, the work life. They might be involved in environments such as local church or community activities, or the environment of the kids' school per se, or the environment of Alex's baseball activities. Outside of Alex's baseball activities, though, and going to the school for things, Jessica is really not involved in any other environmental systems, and she's typically pretty isolated in the household due to Jonathan's controlling behaviors, and he requires that she have the location services turned on her phone so that he knows where she is all the time. So if she does decide to go anywhere else besides taking Alex to practice or doing something with Jacob, such as him getting, like treatment services for his autism, if she decides to go to the grocery store, but basically if she does anything outside of what she tells Jonathan that she's doing, he knows, and that typically ends up in a conflict that may lead to a violent incident. So, in addition to this assessment phase, the social worker also works with Jonathan and Jessica, again separately, to foster, just that safety in building rapport with them. But they can also kind of just really go through the process of what has occurred during these conflicts that has broken out in violence. What are some of the triggers for Jonathan? So this allows the social worker to provide them with kind of like some psychoeducational tools to learn, okay, well, what are some of the things going on in these conflicts, and what are the some of the steps that they can take to prevent these things from happening in the first place. So Jessica during this point kind of identifies some of these triggers, being obviously if she does something outside of what she's informed Jonathan that she was doing, or Jessica threatening to leave, or try to open up at all about the way that his abuse is making her feel, typically results in him lashing out in anger. So some of the ways that they can possibly mitigate these conflicts to prevent the violence from occurring in future situations can be for Jessica to kind of use her intuition to be conscious of Jonathan's tone and Jonathan's body language, kind of be able to tell when he might be getting angry and might possibly become physically abusive. And Jessica and Jonathan will also collaborate in this way to make a safety plan based on some of these triggers that they've identified. Or that's the safety plan is going to be the biggest step of the intervention for kind of trying to resolve the family violence in the home. So the first step of the safety plan will actually be after, establishing their needs and identifying some of those triggers. Well, actually, before the safety plan, we'll go over some of the red flags. So the social worker reviews a list of some red flags with Jessica, just to kind of give her some perspective and understanding on whether or not the behaviors that Jonathan exhibits actually are abusive. So out of the list, Jessica selects some of the things that she notices happening a lot. One of those being discouraging you from seeing or contacting friends and family. And the resources for identifying these red flags, I actually use the National Domestic Violence Hotline as a resource for kind of outlining some of these red flags in an abusive relationship. So, discouraging you from seeing or contacting friends and family, Jessica has identified that that's definitely something Jonathan has done. Blaming you for the abuse or acting like it's not really happening. Like I stated previously, anytime that Jessica tries to bring it up or, even address the situation, that just leads to a whole conflict within itself, and Jonathan becomes very angry and very controlling, such as threatening her if she tells anybody or tries to contact anybody about it. Sometimes even maybe like threatening self-harm if she leaves or if she tells anybody. He also often says that it's her fault, like, she does something to trigger him or make him mad, which leads to him hitting her or choking her or slapping her. Some of the other red flags include embarrassing or putting down the partner. Jessica claims that that's something that Jonathan does a lot, is really just degrades her and makes attempts to lower her self-esteem, such as telling her that, over the last couple of years she's gotten really fat, or she's not even that hot, and if she decides to leave, then no one's going to want her anyway. Preventing her from attending work or school while she doesn't currently work. That's something that Jessica has wanted to do, is for them to not only have another source of income, but in Jessica's mind to have a backup plan, because Jonathan is the sole breadwinner, and if she ever does want to leave him, she doesn't have any sort of career path going for herself. But Jonathan prevents any of that from happening because he knows that she wants a career so that she can potentially leave him in the future. And in addition to that, one of the other red flags is him threatening to kill or hurt her if she does leave. So some of the steps for creating the safety plan, some of these things will be for Jessica and the children alone, and some of them will be for Jonathan and Jessica during conflicts. The children are not really involved in the creation of the safety plan. Mostly working on the intervention techniques with the family will include Jonathan and Jessica, and the children can be included in some of the services received once the social worker has established that they're really serious about creating a safe environment within the home. And during this time, as Jonathan works services and Jessica works services, and then kind of, try to formulate a safety plan, the children will actually be staying with their grandparents. That's another important part, is identifying a stable third is a way that domestic violence intervention often occurs, is just identifying that safe person to go to, or that they might be able to go stay with, that the victim and the family can go stay with. And Jessica has identified that stable third as her mother. So even though she didn't previously know about the abuse in the home, through the use of this safety plan, Jessica will indeed need to speak with her parents about the abuse that's been going on, despite how challenging that might be. So the first step of the safety plan will be preparing for leaving the home if needed. So preparing for leaving the home may include her packing a bag, which can include important items such as keepsakes, important documents like maybe a passport, social security card, birth certificates, important documents for the children that might be pertinent to, things that they may need. The next step will be solving conflict or preventing a violent incident from breaking out in the first place. And this is where Jessica and Jonathan will collaborate together. So that will actually include, like we've discussed previously, they kind of have identified some of Jonathan's triggers, and I think he realizes when he's getting angry as well. Whether or not he has a lot of motivation for change and can actually put these things into practice is to be determined. Jessica will, again, use her intuition to detect when there may be a risk of an incident occurring, such as focusing on his body language, or whether or not he's becoming angry, or whether or not he's drinking alcohol, because that's another reason that he often becomes abusive, is because he does actually abuse alcohol. Often he stays out late with his coworkers and comes home drunk, often drives drunk. But another part of this, preventing a violent incident from occurring in the first place, is Jessica putting herself in a position where she could easily access an exit, such as, not being in an area where the front or back door is close by. Another important part of the safety plan will be teaching the children to be safe. So even though they're staying with their grandparents right now, a safety plan can also be used in the future when they are staying back with the parents. So that can include, teaching the kids how to be safe in these situations, like maybe leaving out the back door and going to the neighbor's house, or calling their grandmother, or having to call 911 in a certain situation. The next step is gathering emergency resources, and this is kind of the final step. So that includes receiving a copy of an application for a protective order. So even though Jessica and Jonathan are trying to resolve things and stay together at this point in time, a situation might occur where Jessica kind of has said, this is enough, and I feel the need to leave the home because things have gotten so scary, and I'm fearing for my life, and she might need a protective order or a restraining order to keep her safe from Jonathan while she's staying with herself and the children at her parents' house. Having emergency resources also includes, maybe identifying the 911 number and the number of her mother and putting them on speed dial. In addition to this, Jessica has an app on her phone that's specifically for notifying someone that she is listed on the contacts to identify in an emergency, so she can just open that app and actually click a certain button for that. But all of these are really important steps in the safety plan to making sure that Jessica stays safe. So after the safety plan, we'll kind of break down some of the community resources and referrals for intervention. So for Jessica, that's going to include individualized counseling sessions in addition to group therapy sessions. We used Genesis Women's Shelter's model for this portion of the intervention. The practical implications guide that discussed the domestic violence implications for practitioners was really helpful in kind of helping to understand how victim services work, such as improving their social support and attending counseling support groups at a local advocacy center. So, participating in community based advocacy services have been found to result in a higher quality of life and greater social support for some of these battered women. For Jonathan, he's actually he's willing to attend a batterer intervention program as well as drug and alcohol counseling to deal with his addiction issues. So, the batterer intervention program that he's going to be attending will be a feminist approach, informed approach. And this approach kind of revolves around the idea that domestic violence that happens to women at the hands of men often has to do with the patriarchal structure of society. You know that that men view themselves in society as more powerful and having control over women. So this batter intervention program will occur over a series of sessions over a small period of time. This may include, having them be, addressing some of their coercive and controlling behaviors and having them really critically analyze how they can change these. And a lot of this intervention program really also focuses on just taking accountability for the abuse. So overall, it'll be 24 group sessions that he's gonna work with other batterers. For Alex, the intervention that we identified for Alex will also be an intervention program that was designed by Genesis Women's Shelter for individualized therapy sessions and group therapy sessions. And because Jacob is a lot younger and is on the autism spectrum, his interventions for promoting healing have to be a little bit more individualized. So his intervention plan will involve specific counseling services that are geared towards children with autism. So yeah, overall, I found it really valuable to be able to break down a safety plan, although I don't specifically work with this population. I think that I would feel ready to work with this population or help one of my own particular clients in the inpatient psychiatric setting access these services. So that's my media component. Thank you.